Good evening.
Good evening.
We'll do that again. Good evening.
Good evening.
I want to thank all of you for coming tonight. The Baker Institute, of course, has hosted over the years an extraordinary array of speakers from whom we've learned about an amazing array of topics. I'd like to begin by thanking the Baker Institute for Public Policy, and it's good to note that Secretary Baker is joining us this evening, and also the Jones Graduate School of Business for arranging this event. Our speaker this evening, Howard Schultz. How many people have not been to a Starbucks? I didn't see any hands go up. Well, Howard Schultz grew up in the Brooklyn housing projects and was the first in his family to go to college. He joined Starbucks in 1982, and under his leadership, the company grew from 6 stores and less than 100 employees to close to 30,000 stores in 77 countries around the world. Today, Starbucks ranks number 5 on Fortune magazine's list of most admired companies. For me, of course, he's the man who taught me and others to say things like decaf double tall, non-fat cappuccino. But Starbucks was also among the first companies to offer health care and stock ownership to part-time workers. More recently, it pioneered a program that provides free college tuition for its employees. In June of last year, Howard left Starbucks and became chairman emeritus. His new book, From the Ground Up, chronicles his childhood alongside his efforts to address social challenges with creative solutions. He is, for many, an example of what values-based leadership is all about. More recently, of course, he's explored the possibility of entering into politics. But tonight, he is really here to talk to us about leadership and its role in the many spheres of American life. Please join me in welcoming Howard Schultz.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm glad I'm talking about leadership and not politics, although I'll try and sprinkle a little bit of that in. So I thought I'd begin with a story that happened to me a few years back. I was visiting Starbucks stores in the UK, and I had a couple of hours to kill, and I thought I would walk the streets of London, and I was very curious about what other retailers were doing, and I thought I might see something of interest that possibly could be applied to Starbucks. And I've done this many, many times. And so I walked into one retailer after another, and I'm on a high street, very fashion street in London, and I see a sign and a store that does not belong on this very expensive street. And the sign was just the word cheese. I walked into the store, and it was about 10 feet wide, maybe less than 1,000 square feet. And the man behind the counter was not the kind of person that I thought would be hired at Starbucks. He had a flannel shirt on, ripped at the elbow, unshaven, and was kind of grumpy. I started talking to him. And within about 10, 15 minutes, he had basically described to me every type of cheese he had in the store, the mouthfeel, the balance, the acidity, how it would go with wine. And even though I was staying at a hotel room, I spent 30 pounds, which is about $50, $60, on cheese that I did not need. I finally got up the courage after about 20 minutes in the store to ask him the most important question, and that was, "Sir, this is an expensive street. I can't possibly imagine how you are making enough money selling cheese to afford the rent. How do you do it?" And he says to me, "Young man, let me tell you a story. We don't pay the rent. We own the building." And I said, "Wow, you own the building. You could make a lot more money if you rented the store to somebody." He said, "No, listen, let me tell you a story. He said, this store, this cheese, this business, over 100 years old. And right now, my son is making cheese about 50 kilometers outside of London. And that's what I did when I was a kid. And that's what my grandfather did. And the reason we're here is out of respect for the values of the people who came before us. And we're trying to pay it forward. So what was the lesson that I took away from that? It was not a lesson of leadership, but it was a lesson of humility, a lesson of grace, a lesson that not everything is about making money, and also the value of generational respect for family. And I took that story away, and I've told it many times at Starbucks. And so I've been asked today to speak about leadership and what is leadership? And what does it mean at a time like this in America when I think we probably all can agree, Republican, Democrat, independent, red state, blue state, young, old, that there's something not quite right. That there's a lack of dignity, a lack of grace, a lack of values, lack of sincerity, and most importantly, a lack of trust. And I would submit that the first order of business of a leader is to establish the currency of trust. And the currency of trust means that you can't always act in a trustful way only when the cameras are on or people are watching, but you got to do it all the time. And leadership also means that it's really easy and convenient to be a leader when you've got the wind at your back, but very, very difficult and challenging when you've got the wind in your face. Warren Bennis, who has been labeled the Peter Drucker of leadership, who passed away a few years ago, reached the conclusion after many, many years of studying leadership that leaders are not born, they're made, and that anyone could be a leader. In my case, my leadership skills, if I have any, are really born out of my childhood. And my childhood influenced how I would see the world and build the kind of company that my father never got a chance to work for. I grew up in public housing and experienced things as a poor kid, living on the other side of the tracks that unfortunately produced a level of shame, vulnerability, insecurity, and the scars of realizing that we were living not as well as others, and I was embarrassed by it. And I tried every step of the way to kind of hide it and kind of figure out a way out. When I was 7 years old, something happened that scarred me for my life. And that was my father was a blue-collar worker, World War II veteran, but never really found his place in America and had a series of blue-collar jobs. In 1960, he was a truck driver delivering and picking up cloth diapers before the invention of Pampers. He falls on a sheet of ice in 1960, and as a blue-collar worker in 1960, gets dismissed, no workman's compensation, no health insurance, and our family is basically facing a level of destitute. And I saw and witnessed for the next couple of years what that meant, and which a family loses hope and opportunity and not seen, not understood, and what people have to do to try and make ends meet. That shaped how I would kind of see the world and what I wanted to try and do. I never dreamed I would be in a position to be part of a company that could institute the kind of policies that are values-based. But when I was at Starbucks, I began to realize that the business that we were in was not the coffee business, that we were in the people business, and that the way to succeed was through the performance of making sure that we were financially successful, but through the lens of humanity. And as a result of that, the leaders of the company who all had to come together, values-based, aligned on one thing, and that was to try and achieve the fragile balance between profit and conscience, benevolence, and responsibility to our people. And as a business leader, I learned two very important things. One, that not every business decision should be and is an economic one. And two, in our case, and I think this should be true in more businesses across the country, and that is success is best when it's shared. So if I came to you as an investor in 1989, 1990, when we were a private company and still losing money, and I said we were going to try and build a company and try and sell coffee for $3 to $4 a cup with Italian names that no one could pronounce, and we're going to give health insurance to every employee, and on top of that, we're going to give ownership to every employee, how many people would have invested? Not many, because 242 people turned me down. And they turned me down because they could not see that you could build a business in which you could balance profit with the kind of things that we were going to try and do. Starbucks' success is steeped in humanity and steeped in the fact that we recognized as leaders and managers that in order to succeed and exceed the expectations of our customers, that as managers and leaders, we had to exceed the expectations first of our people. And we had to do it all the time. So for the last 40 years, every Monday morning in a leadership meeting and in every quarter in a board meeting, I've had two chairs that have been empty in the boardroom. And those two chairs were a metaphor, one for a customer and one for a Starbucks employee that we call a partner. And in my mind's eye, for the last 40 years, in every one of those meetings, and people in the meeting knew this, I'd be asking the rhetorical question, this decision we're about to make, this strategy we're about to embrace, is it going to make our people and our customers proud? And if the answer was yes, we absolutely knew we were on the right track. And if the answer is no, we weren't going to do it. And if the answer was somewhat gray, then we were going to debate it for a while until we got the right answer. But you can't build a great, enduring business unless the people who are working for you want to go home at night and share with their friends, their partners, their mothers, their fathers, their husbands or wife or partner, that they're really proud of the values and guiding principles and the culture of the company. So I want to talk a little bit about culture and what it means and why that has been so important in building the kind of company that is values-based, and what it means to be a leader when the culture is being challenged. So Starbucks was on an unbelievable ride from 1992 when we went public until today. But in 2007, 2008, Starbucks got into big trouble. And the big trouble was twofold. One was we were facing, like everybody else, a cataclysmic financial crisis. And then we had a disease that entered the company. And the disease was a self-induced level of mistakes named hubris. And hubris is a disease inside a company or any organization. Because what happened at Starbucks was that we began to believe that since we were so successful and so smart, that everything or anything we were going to do was going to work. And it didn't. And it didn't because we allowed growth and success to cover up mistakes. And as a public company, we also began to realize that we were measuring our results on the wrong outcome. And that was, as a public company, we were measuring our results on the stock price. And we were using the stock price as a litmus test. And everything we were trying to do was to raise the stock price as opposed to exceed the expectations of our customers and our partners. So in 2008, I stood up in front of the entire company, and we were facing, believe it or not, 8 months. If we continued on this pace, we were going to face insolvency. And I stood up in front of the entire company, and I apologized for the fact that as leaders, we had led them and their families down. And I cried that day. I cried in front of our people and felt so embarrassed, so ashamed that we had put ourselves in this position. We also had to close 1,000 stores in 2008. And for the first time in our history, we had to let people go. It was a tragic, tragic moment of realizing that we were going to fracture the lives and families because we as leaders had let them down. And then we had to realize that we had to regroup and restore faith and confidence in the core philosophy of the company, which we had lost. We closed every store for training during that period. And believe it or not, the training we had to do, and this is hard to even imagine, was we had to admit to ourselves that we forgot how to make good coffee in 2008. And the reason for that is that someone in the company, good intentions, decided that if we just reduce the blend of coffee about 5–7%, we would make a lot more money and no one would really know. And you know what happened? About a year later, a lot of people realized, you know what? Starbucks coffee just doesn't taste the same anymore. Something's not right. And what wasn't right is that someone had decided a lot more money, a lot more profit, but customers walked away. So we closed our stores for retraining on everything that relates to making coffee. Hard to believe. And we had to stand up to the world and say we're closing our stores for retraining. And people asked, what are you going to retrain them on? Making coffee. Then I realized that there were 10,000 store managers in the company at the time. And I realized that I needed an opportunity to be in front of 10,000 store managers, to talk to them, to express to them what we need and what it means to take it personally. And so this is a time in America where no company was traveling. It was really during the crisis. And so we had municipalities coming out of the woodwork to invite us to their city and bring 10,000 people to their city. The city of New Orleans and the Chamber of Commerce came into our office and talked about the events of Katrina and literally started crying in the meeting and said, you must come to New Orleans. We need you to come to New Orleans. And we knew in a minute that that's where we were going to go. So we brought 10,000 people to New Orleans at a cost of $30 million at a time in America. No company was traveling, and we didn't really have $30 million to spend. But the issue was, if we're a people-based company, we got to bring our people together and galvanize them. The first thing we did when we got to New Orleans is commit 50,000 hours of community service in the 9th Ward in New Orleans to restore the faith and confidence in the values and culture and guiding principles of Starbucks. And then the next 2-3 days, we had our meeting. On the third day, in the giant basketball arena in New Orleans, I had to give a $30 million speech. And we had our board of directors there, we had shareholders there, and so I'm preparing what I'm going to say, and a few of my colleagues are asking me, what is it you're going to talk about? And I had some notes, and I showed them what I was going to say. And they said, Howard, you can't possibly share this information with 10,000 store managers. You can't tell them how bad it is. You're going to scare them. They will not be able to handle the information. So one question for the leader is, if you are basically asking people to join with you, to embrace this moment, how could you possibly ask them to join with you and not provide them with the same level of information and insight that you have, regardless of how dangerous this information is? And how could you not trust your people with the information? So I didn't take the advice of my colleagues, not because they were wrong. They were. I went out in front of 10,000 people, and I told the truth. And the truth was that we were 8 months away from insolvency, and we had made a lot of mistakes. But this is a moment of opportunity in which everyone here represents 10, 20, 30 different Starbucks employees, Starbucks partners in your respective store. And if everyone in this company, you and your 10, 20, or 30 other partners, exceed the expectations of every single customer from this moment on, we will turn this around. I don't think we could have turned the company around, not because of the power of my words, But I don't think the company would have turned around if we did not share the information truthfully, honestly, with a level of transparency that we did. And we left New Orleans like a tidal wave in which the company was completely transformed as a result of that. Now, in the last 10 years or so, as a public CEO, I made the decision that the role and responsibility of a public company in America today is changing. One, because the government, in my view, was not doing what it needed to do on behalf of the American people. And I felt that the role and responsibility of a public company today is not only to make money and create shareholder value, although that is the price of admission, and we, as a fiduciary, we have to do that. And so we started engaging the public in a number of social issues to elevate the national conversation on things that we thought were critically important to the communities we serve, to our customers, to the nation, and also, once again, asking the question, is this going to make our people proud? And we took on a number of issues, including race. Now, the race issue, I want to talk a little bit about that because it was so controversial at the time, and it ended up not working. And what was happening in America is we were witnessing the shootings of African-American young men, and there were riots in the streets, and I decided one day that as a company, we should not ignore what's going on, and I called a company-wide meeting of all of our employees, and I did not tell them what the subject was. I told a few people in the morning, and they said, Howard, come on, you can't bring race into the building. You just can't talk about this. It's not appropriate. And I felt our people could handle it. I also knew that we had a 30-year history of having town hall meetings once a quarter in which the company talks about lots of things, and that the culture and values of the company could handle the subject of race. And so I introduced the subject, and I spoke for maybe 5-7 minutes, and I said, I've been told that perhaps we can't handle this conversation today. But I also feel like if we just come here and ring the register and do our jobs and ignore what's going on in the country, then we are being a bystander and we're hiding. And I want to elevate the conversation today, and I want to demonstrate that our values can handle this. And so we had a discussion for about 2 hours of a large group of people. And it was amazing to me that both Caucasians, Hispanics, African Americans stood up and started sharing with each other their pain, their bias, and their personal story. And as a leader, what I learned that day is that we must have conversations with each other that sometimes are uncomfortable. I also learned that day that almost everyone in that room, and I'll take a leap of faith, almost everyone in this room has some level of unconscious bias because of our own life experience and how we have lived our life. From that meeting, we had 12 other meetings around the country on race. And this is what our people asked us to do. And we had a meeting in Ferguson, and a young man stood up, an African American, in a group as large as this, and he stood up and he said, I'm 18 years old, and I don't know if I'll make it to 19. And you could have heard a pin drop in the room that an 18-year-old African American was worried about making it to 19 just because of the color of his skin. Those meetings and those testimonies brought us to a much bigger question. And the question is, what was the responsibility of our company in hearing all this to engage our customers in the subject of race, of injustice? And what's the role and responsibility of a company? Is it just to make profit? Is it to have these kind of conversations when, in fact, no company in America has ever really talked about race publicly? We had a big board meeting. The board has African Americans on the board, and one board member who I respect greatly, African American, named Melody Hobson, said to me, "Howard, I don't think Starbucks or you has the moral authority to talk about race. I respect so much what you're trying to do, but you don't have the moral authority to do it." The question is, if we don't have the moral authority to do it, who is going to do it? And why don't we? And if we don't do it, we're just ignoring what's going on when we've learned so much over the past few months about what's happening in America and how our people are feeling. So I had the brilliant idea that why don't we write something on the cup? And someone came up with a couple of words that sounded right to me. It's my idea. I embraced it. I'm the leader of the company. I don't make any mistakes. We wrote "Race Together" on the cups. And we told our people, if you engage in conversations with your customers, use this as a tool. And we launched it with great intention. And within a few hours, the initiative was hijacked on Twitter, literally hijacked. And we completely lost the narrative. And there was just a real problem. And two things happened within 24 hours. The first is that a white customer in a southern state walked into a Starbucks store and refused to be served by an African-American barista. The second was that we got a phone call that someone shot a bullet through one of our stores in another state. It turned out not to be a bullet, but a ball bearing from a slingshot that broke the glass and could have killed somebody. And so we completely shut it down, and we stopped it. And we were, on Twitter and in America, we were vilified for trying to do something. So what's the lesson here? Well, I think the lesson here is, what is the moral obligation and responsibility of business A? What is the role of being a leader, of trying to do something that hasn't been done before? If you're trying to really make your people proud and elevate the national conversation, in our case, 100 million people go through Starbucks stores. So if we could elevate the national conversation in a positive way, maybe we can make a real difference. Interestingly enough, 5 years later, when we do a cultural audit of all the things we do, our people look back on Race Together as one of the things they are most proud of, that the company had the courage to try and do, even though it failed. Fast forward, a few months ago, we had a terrible situation in Philadelphia. I'm sure many of you are aware of that, where two African-American young men walked into a Starbucks store, and because of a bad policy that existed in the company, they asked to use the bathroom. And the manager, who was white, the policy was it was kind of up to the manager whether or not you could use the bathroom if you don't buy anything. And she said, if you're not going to buy anything, you can't use the bathroom. And within a couple of minutes, there was a verbal exchange. She got intimidated, and she made a call to the police, called 911, to two young men. Police came within minutes. They were handcuffed. They were arrested. Thank God they did not resist. Something really bad could have happened. Somebody videotaped it on their phone, filmed it on their phone, and the virality within an hour or two was 15 to 20 million views. And Starbucks was labeled as a racist company. Now, I can tell you that nothing obviously could be further from the truth, but there's nothing in the textbook of building or managing a company that prepares you for anything like this. And so you are instinctively responding to things that you have to do. And this is the role of leaders. What do? We immediately rushed to Philadelphia. We met with the two young men. We apologized. We met with clergy. We met with the media. We met with as many people as we could to try and explain the situation, and something was happening. What was happening is everyone rushed to judgment and was blaming the white manager, that she was the villain. She was the problem. Her picture was in the paper in Philadelphia, and she had death threats. As a company, we knew the mistake was not hers. The mistake was ours, because we had a policy that did not provide her the tools and the resources to answer the question properly. And then something happened to me, and that was CBS News said, we want to come to Philadelphia and do a live interview with Gayle King, African-American newscaster, with you in the store where it happened. And I said, okay, we'll do it. The Starbucks team and the people who are trying to protect the company in terms of its image said, if you are asked this question on national TV, please, Howard, do not answer it in the affirmative. And the question was whether or not this was racial profiling. Now, I knew 48 hours ago when I sat down with the white manager, who was a wonderful person, wonderful, and I asked her simply, if those two gentlemen were white, would you have called the police? And she said, I don't think I would have. As soon as she said that, I realized this was racial profiling. So Gayle King on national TV, like minute one, all of a sudden, and by the way, I've got people in the store who are trying to advise me, counsel me, making sure I do not say yes. Gayle King says, Howard, in your opinion, do you think that was racial profiling? Gayle, I believe it was. I told the truth. I told the truth because how could I possibly lie about what I had learned? How could I not be truthful? How could I deny our people the responsibility of what it means to be a servant leader? And a servant leader is something that we are longing for in our daily lives, in our institutions, and a servant leader serves his or her people before you serve yourself. So I was asked recently on a town hall, you brought up the issue of servant leader. Who do you think is a servant leader today? I was hard-pressed to think, who is the servant leader? And I remember the image of the Pope on his hands and knees, scrubbing the feet of that peasant woman. And I said, I'm Jewish. I've never met the Pope. But when I saw that image, that to me was the image of what it means to be a servant leader. Servant leadership is inspiring others, not because of a 140-character tweet, and not because of a press release or because it's going to make you more money. It's because you're going to elevate your people, you're going to elevate one person. You're going to do what you have to do as a servant leader to make somebody better and bring people along. So I guess that brings me to the country and what I'm thinking of doing and why. Going back to my childhood and who I am and what have I experienced as a young boy. And remember, I still have the scars and the insecurity of that poor kid. I've lived on both sides, the poor kid in the projects and the successful business person who happened to get fortunate and blessed enough to find a company to be able to build in America. I look at the country today, and I've traveled the last year almost as many places as I possibly can to meet people and hear the American story. And what I see and what I've heard and what I've witnessed is ordinary people doing extraordinary things for their fellow neighbor and their community. But there's a sadness, a cloud hanging over the country. And the sadness and the cloud hanging over the country is a lack of faith, a lack of belief in the promise of the country, and the American dream, that it still exists, especially for those people who feel as if they have been left behind. I was one of those kids who were left behind, and only in America. And Starbucks is in 77 countries all over the world, and I've had the good fortune of being in all of them. Only in America can a kid come from the projects and be on this stage at Rice University and have the honor of Secretary Baker in the audience. But I ask myself, those kids in the projects today, those people in West Virginia, the people in McAllen, Texas, are they going to have the access to the American dream that I was fortunate enough to have? And it's a question mark. It's not a question mark because of the goodness and the kindness of the American people. It's a question about leadership, about our faith and confidence in the government and public institutions. And I think right now in America, I think we all can agree on one thing. Things aren't going exactly the way they should be, here at home and abroad. And as a result of that, I've asked myself a number of questions and tried to study the situation. And I've determined for myself that both parties are complicit, perhaps not equally, but complicit at the extremes of their ideology and their self-interest and self-preservation in not fixing some of the very complex problems that have been with us for a long time. So when I look at a country that is sitting with $22 trillion in debt and $500 billion in interest expense and adding $1 trillion a year, an immigration policy that both President Obama and President Bush tried to solve, but the opposition turned them down, and here we are again, not working. A healthcare system, an education system, and a crisis of homelessness, opioids, and mental health issues. That this is not the country that my parents and my grandparents sacrificed for if we don't address these things in the most humane way. And I think it comes down to a commitment to accountability and leadership. And I don't think the leaders at the extremes of both parties are willing to come together on behalf of the American people. They certainly have had plenty of opportunity to do so. And it doesn't appear to me like it's going to happen anytime soon. I also feel that if a Democrat is able to win the presidency in 2020, there's no evidence whatsoever, at least for me, that all of a sudden both parties and Mitch McConnell and others are just going to start playing nice and everything's going to be wonderful. I also am very worried that the Democratic Party may nominate a well-intentioned person, but a person whose ideology is based on something very close to a level of socialism that I don't think is good for our democracy and free enterprise system. And I don't want to see President Trump candidly reelected because I think the character, the honor, the dignity of the office needs to be restored. It's so vitally important to every American and vitally important to our standing in the world. And so I've stood up and I've said to the American people that I'm seriously considering running for president as a centrist independent outside of the two-party system, realizing this has never successfully been done before, although George Washington, in a sense, was an independent. And you would have thought that I committed a really bad act by saying that, because there's been a character assassination and certainly a lot of heat that I have endured over the last 4 to 5 weeks, when in fact I think this is really an expression of our democracy, that I'm willing to stand up and say I think the two-party system is broken and I'd like to try and make a difference. I think there's a path to 270. We're sitting here in Texas, and I do believe that although it hasn't happened since 1976, that Donald Trump will not win the state of Texas should an independent person enter the race. And if he doesn't win the state of Texas, there's a very, very strong likelihood he cannot be reelected. He won't get to 270. And so I'm traveling the country and doing everything I can to share my message, ignite a national movement. 100 million Americans did not vote in 2016. There's a large amount of young people who are going to be 18 years old for the first time who are going to vote in 2020. And let's see what happens. And I'm excited about it, realizing how tough this climb is. And I'm going to try and do something that hasn't been done before for one reason: love of country and my profound concern for where we are as a country and the need for repair, the need to kind of return ourselves to the level of pride and feelings we have about what it means to be an American. And if I can, I'm going to close with a really brief story. I know I'm over my time. But I happened to travel to Normandy with my wife recently, and I write about this in the epilogue of the book. And two unbelievable situations happened. I know there's many people in the audience who have been to Normandy. You've walked through the cemetery of 9,300 headstones of extraordinary people who sacrificed their lives for us. And you walk through Omaha Beach, and you're just in awe of who scaled that cliff, how did they do it. And at the end of the day, which was such an emotional day, we're leaving, and we're in the parking lot. And right next to us, a car pulls up, and I hear an American voice. So I just get out and start talking. And it's a couple in their 30s from Baltimore, Maryland. She's a nurse, and he's a lawyer, and I just simply asked the question, what brought you to Normandy today? And she did not miss a beat, not a beat, and says, we came to Normandy to be reminded of who we once were. And I honestly felt like it was a spear that went through my heart, that you'd have to go to Normandy to be reminded of who we once were. An hour before that, I had a completely different experience, equally as moving, a little bit more uplifting. I'm in the cemetery, my wife and we kind of split up, and I'm walking by myself, and maybe 70, 80 yards away, I see a human figure, and I just started walking towards the person. And as I get closer, I realize it's somebody who is an employee of the American Cemetery in a green uniform. And as I get really close, I'm 5 yards away, I see the man on his knees. What is he doing? He's got a hand scrub brush. And he is scrubbing the headstone one by one out of respect for the fallen. And I'm watching him. I mean, he's not doing it casually. He is scrubbing, cleaning. And I kneel down to him, and I just say, thank you for what you're doing. And I realize he doesn't speak a word of English. And he stands up, and he says to me in English, thank America. Thank America. I started tearing up. I was so moved by it. So here I was in Normandy, so far away from America, where I have a Frenchman thanking America, and I have a young couple from Maryland coming to Normandy to be reminded of who we once were. And so I say to all of you, we don't have to go to Normandy to be reminded of who we once were. We know who we are, and we know who we must be again. And that Frenchman who thanked us is those 9,300 fallen saved the world, saved us. Remember the man from the cheese story? What did he say to me? In honor of the people who came before me. And I say to all of you, we have a moral obligation as citizens to do everything we can to be highly respectful of the people who came before us, who gave us the gift of being an American. And that gift, ladies and gentlemen, is not an entitlement. We have to earn it, and we have to earn it again. Thank you very much. So, I think I'm inviting Mark Jones up here.
Thank you very much. That was a wonderful talk.
Thank you.
I'm going to provide a few questions that are drawn from your excellent book, as well as some, since we are at the Baker Institute, the man who ran 5 presidential campaigns, we are going to probably have a few questions on politics as well.
I did ask him earlier if he'd come out of retirement for me.
You couldn't find anyone better. But. And we also have question cards. We'll have people who are coming to pick them up. So they're in the back. If you just want to raise them up, they can come by and get them. And we'll do those in a few minutes. So I read your excellent book, and there were some really moving passages in it. There's one that I recall where you were sitting in a stairwell, and the desire was to escape the chaos of your home. Yeah. Could you talk about that a little bit and how that's influenced you?
Yeah. So the building I lived in, there were 80 apartments in the project, and there's a lot of noise because we all lived very close together. And in my own household, there was a lot of chaos and dysfunction. And as a young boy, every time I turned the doorknob to enter the apartment, I had anxiety about what I was going to experience. And so I found this stairwell between the 7th and 8th floor. I lived on the 7th floor. And I escaped to that stairwell very, very often, and it provided me with both an opportunity to dream and an opportunity to hide. And that stairwell, in so many ways, provided a place for me to feel safe from what was going on. Interestingly enough, when I was on 60 Minutes 4 or 5 weeks ago, although they cut it out, I had not sat in that stairwell for 30, 40 years. And when I sat down on that stairwell and Scott Pelley was starting to film, I started feeling almost a level of anxiety that I could not control because I was reliving what had happened to me. And I write in the book that I was abused as a young boy, not sexually, but physically by my father.
And then from there, you went very far away. So you went from Brooklyn to the Upper Peninsula, Marquette at Northern Michigan University on the shore of Lake Superior. Yeah. The first in your family to go to college. Yeah. What was that transition like?
Well, I couldn't get further from Brooklyn than to Northern Michigan. And not by design, but that's how it happened. I spent 4 wonderful years in Northern Michigan. I have lifelong friends. It was a completely different experience, as you might imagine, not to mention 200 inches of snow a year. But in order to go to school, I didn't have any money. I took student debt. I had a job. And then once a month, as I write in the book, I would give blood, which I wasn't the only one doing it at the time, just to have cash in my pocket. But it was a very good experience for me, and had the good fortune of going back and giving a commencement address a few years ago. But I have great memories of Northern Michigan, and from there I went to work for Xerox.
When we're thinking about higher education, you talked about how you really struggled to go to college.
Yes.
One thing that I think is really exciting is your innovative partnership with Arizona State, which has really set the mold for other corporations in terms of providing education to their employees in a way that's affordable, if not free, and convenient.
Yeah, so we discovered at Starbucks that about 70% of the Starbucks workforce had gone to college and did not finish. And the majority of people who did not finish told us it was because of student debt, which is a very common issue, as you know, throughout the country. And so we met an extraordinary educator by the name of Michael Crow, who's a kind of a force of nature and knows more about higher ed than almost anyone I've ever met. And I went to him and I said, could we crack the code and figure out a way to create a partnership with ASU? And believe it or not, this is a 3-way partnership between Starbucks, ASU, and US government because of Pell Grants. And basically, we now have, I think, about 10,000 people who are enrolled, thousands who have graduated, and it's free college tuition for every single employee. And once again, these kinds of programs, when they are met with resistance from shareholders, because people view these things as a zero-sum game, and your role and responsibility as fiduciaries to make money. And what we've learned over the years is that by investing in our people, we're going to lower attrition rates, we're going to get higher performance, and people's attachment and pride to the company is going to be so significant that it will elevate performance. Starbucks stock price since 1992 is up 25,000%, despite the fact that we are providing health care, ownership to every employee, which is dilutive to shareholders in a way, and free college tuition.
No, that's great. And I mean, I think it's really impressive what we've seen, and other companies have been following suit, and we've seen Arizona State's partnership grow with other companies, but only because of effectively the baseline that y'all provided.
Well, and I think that whether we're talking about the government or the private sector, we need a level of innovation. We need a level of creative thinking that is not based on the status quo, that we've got to solve problems in a very different way. And I think we're going to have to figure out a way to solve the debt problem. We're going to have to figure out a way to solve the healthcare crisis in America. But it's not going to be based on what we know. It's going to be based on a new level of imagination, entrepreneurship, and perhaps public-private partnerships that would be very different than the status quo.
Okay, I love that topic, but I want to move on. I want to use a little bit of the time that I have remaining to talk about politics, since presidential elections are what I'm really interested in. And so, as you mentioned, you're attempting to do something that no one's ever done before. That is, in the modern era of the current party system, over 150 years, everyone that's won the election has either been a Democrat or a Republican. Now, I think you also did note, though, in your talk that we also are in a very polarized period and a very dysfunctional period, perhaps not met, at least in this past century, of that bad. But why do you think that you can achieve where someone such as Robert La Follette, John Anderson, or Ross Perot failed? With Perot, for instance, the only real impact he had is costing George H.W. Bush the presidency.
In this crowd, that's a very tough question. Although I spoke at SMU last night and had the pleasure and the honor of meeting Ross Perot's daughter, who, by the way, was very encouraging. So I think that here's my theory of the case, if I can lay it out. We are living at a time, I think, where the polarization, the dysfunction, and the American people are disgusted and fed up with the fact that we're not getting the kind of progress that we deserve. The first thing is that as we sit today, 30% of the electorate are registered independents. An additional 12% say if there was a legitimate independent person, they would affiliate themselves as an independent. If you believe those numbers, that's 42%. That's larger than either party. That's the first thing. Second thing is we've done the work that if we proceed, we will be on the ballot of every state. And the last thing is that over the last 30-plus years, the presidential election has been decided by basically 8 to 10 battleground states. Should I choose to run as an independent, I mentioned the state of Texas, which is true. About 45 of the 50 states, for the first time in 30-plus years, there will be a three-way race. And if you are a Republican in a Democratic state, or vice versa, for the first time in 30-plus years, your vote and your voice is going to matter. And so we think there's a path to 270. Certainly, if the Democrats do nominate somebody as far, far left as Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, and that's where the Democratic Party goes, to that level of extreme. And I think millions of Republicans who want a choice unlike Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, who do not respect the character, morality, and the lack of dignity of this president, millions of lifelong Republicans, I think, could have a better choice and a better option. And that's our theory of the opportunity. Now, what I've said publicly is if we get to a point where the math doesn't add up, I would do nothing to re-elect Donald Trump myself. But having said that, it concerns me greatly that we could have two choices that, in a sense, could be less than the choice we had in 2016.
Okay, so going then on that point, so I think you're put in a situation where, if we're in a situation where we have two different flavors of poison, so Donald Trump on one side.
I like the way you said that.
Yeah, Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders on the other, both of which are people that a majority of the population would prefer perhaps not be president. If that scenario is play, I think what you're saying is then you're more likely to run. Now, what if the alternative is the case? Let's say the Democratic nominee, when we get to this time next year, when you're trying to deal with ballot access in Texas and getting your 100,000 signatures of registered voters who didn't vote in the Democratic and Republican primary and do so within our 6-week window. We love ballot access in Texas.
But isn't that interesting how the impediment to getting registered in Texas exists?
Yeah.
Why is that? Is that democracy?
No, it's to keep anybody else from running, keep the Greens off the ballot, but also keep anyone else off.
Okay.
So that's an easy answer. But let's say it's not.
I didn't know this was going to be a debate, but now that I know, I'm going to get a little stronger.
Okay. So let's say we get away from someone on the far left like Elizabeth Warren or Kamala Harris or Bernie Sanders, who a lot of people, if Texas looks at them, they're like, no, or at least the majority of Texans. But what if it's somebody like Joe Biden or Amy Klobuchar or Beto O'Rourke, our favorite native son, who at least theoretically is centrist, although he tends to be drifting to the left as time passes?
I'm not at this point going to use the whoever's going to run be the calculus for what I'm going to do. Okay. So I'm looking at this on my own merit. I'm looking at this for my love of the country and my personal responsibility and my conviction. But if the math doesn't work, regardless of who it is, I will not be a spoiler. Okay. I will say that if it's a far left person running against Donald Trump, that's the spoiler.
Yeah. It certainly creates a conundrum for a majority of Americans, probably.
Yeah.
Oh, and then so the final question there, and then if we can bring the cards up, would be, if you do decide to run, do you have any date in mind by which you would announce, or will you keep us guessing like Beto does, where he keeps teasing and teasing and teasing up to the point where people are starting to get frustrated with him?
Are you frustrated?
I'm frustrated with Beto, yes. Again, call after call, and everybody's saying, is he going to do it? Is he going to do it up by South by Southwest, or is he going to wait? I mean, people are starting to get annoyed with Beto.
Do you think he's going to run?
Right now, I guess I would, but he could also go up to Alaska and go live in a bus or into the wild or whatever. So who knows at this point?
Wow. You're an objective voter, though, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm objective.
What was the question?
When do you think you might announce? If you're going to announce.
Kidding. Yeah. I think by the summer, I'll make a definitive decision. I won't do what Beto's doing to annoy you. In fact, I'll call you personally.
Okay.
And, make sure
just
you're
a heads
aware.
up. Well, at least just don't tease us like he does.
I won't tease you, but I will be asking for your support.
Yeah. Okay. And no trips to the orthodontist either. We don't really need to see that.
I will say one thing. You are following Beto.
Oh, it's my job. Okay, so now we have some time for some questions from the audience. So the first question is, what advice or guidance would you give the 28-year-old version of yourself today?
It's the same advice I've given my kids who are about this age. And I said it earlier to a group of young people that I met with. And first off, I wouldn't be in such a hurry. You're at an age right now where you should be as curious as possible about the world. You should put yourself in situations where you're meeting people who are not like yourself, different life experiences. You should travel and be as curious as possible to experience the world. In terms of work and career, I think if you're going to be an entrepreneur and you want to do something on your own, you will benefit greatly by working and finding an organization whose values are compatible with your own, and be part of that organization and learn and watch how good organizations function. And if you're going to start your own business and it doesn't work, believe it or not, fail fast and keep trying. But don't be in such a rush. I mean, somehow this young generation feels so strongly that we've got to do so many things so early, and I think it's robbing you of time. You've got plenty of time. My son is 32, my daughter's 30, and I'm constantly telling them, slow down and take your time and experience life. It goes pretty quick.
Ferris Bueller said that, I think, or something along those lines.
He's also a comedian.
So the next question is, the road to the presidency will be tough. How are you prepared for this challenge?
Well, I have not decided to, Mark, as you know, to run for president yet, but I will let you know.
Yeah.
Listen, I've been traveling the country for a year. I think I have a good understanding of the personal constitution that's necessary to do this. Listen, the last 4 weeks I've been under attack by the Democrats, so I'm getting an early taste of the character assassination already. Listen, if I proceed, I'm doing this because I'm deeply, deeply engaged in doing everything I can to elevate the American promise. And I'm doing it for the people who came before me. And that won't be an issue in terms of my ability to have the courage of my convictions.
Thank you. And let's see, my eyesight's not that good, but I'm going to try to read this one correctly. Essentially, you said you talk about the country's deficit, but then you also have strong feelings about the right of every American to have health care. And how do you reconcile those two things?
Yeah. Well, I do believe that every American deserves the right to have affordable health care. I think the Affordable Health Care Act that President Obama put in place, although pretty much with executive order, more or less, was a good thing for the country in that it enabled about 20 million people to get insurance who didn't have it. Unfortunately, premiums have risen almost double since the initiation of the Affordable Care Act. So my answer is this, is that free Medicare for all is not the solution. That is a $30 trillion number, and that's not what we need. But what we do need is a level of transparency and a negotiation with pharmaceutical companies that we have not had. I don't want to get into that, but it's because of the self-interest of members of Congress. I think we need insurance companies to come to the table and recognize that we need interstate commerce that benefits the consumer. And then I think companies need to step up, not because Starbucks is perfect or we're a proxy, but companies need to do much more. And I think what is going to be required, not mandated, but required, is a healthy understanding that businesses are going to have to do more for their people and in the communities as we go forward. And in terms of the tax that President Trump put in at 21%, I would have never done that. I think it was a mistake. I think it should have been at 24, 25, 26 with an incentive built in for education for your people, for retraining, for job skills, for investments back in your community. But that tax break did not benefit anybody other than the people who were the shareholders in that company. We also missed a great opportunity for comprehensive tax reform, which we need, for infrastructure development. And infrastructure development for me today is not just about bridges and highways, but also about 30% of rural America does not have high-speed internet. And that's another thing. You know, FDR put in a mandate for electricity for everybody. It was an American right, and I think an American right is high-speed internet connection.
All right, yeah, you agree, sort of a rural electrification program, but targeting the internet?
Yes, yes.
And then with pharmaceutical companies, yeah, it is very noteworthy when you see the prices we pay here in the United States, and then you go to Europe or other places and see the same medication for dramatically less.
Why do you think that is?
Lobbyists. and their ilk.
Yeah, speaking about lobbyists, so just a factoid. Yeah. So there are 400 ex-congressmen right now who are recently ex-congressmen. Do you know what their jobs are today?
Lobbyists.
Yeah, so they're lobbying their colleagues.
Yeah.
And a week ago, there was a committee of senators who were basically interviewing the insurance executives and the pharmaceutical executives. I don't know if you might have missed that or not. Yeah. And someone did a little research to see what's the engagement of those people with those companies, and I think it was 70 or 80% of the people on the committee who had taken contributions from both industries. So in a sense, we got the fox in the hen. Yeah.
Well, and that's at the national level. We go one step further here in Texas, where sitting members of the Senate and sitting members of the House are lobbyists for companies, and that's perfectly legal. And they're in office. They don't even have to wait to retire before they're de facto lobbyists.
Let's not replicate that.
No. We'd like to get away from that here, though. That's easier said than done.
Okay.
And we have two final questions. What business leaders do you admire and why?
I think Tim Cook, under very tough circumstances, succeeding Steve Jobs, has done an extraordinary job at Apple. And I think he also recognizes the responsibility that Apple has to give back, and I admire what he's done. In Seattle, Washington, there's a company that doesn't get a lot of credit, and that's the founders of Costco, which is a really benevolent company that has done really well. The two co-founders of that company, Jeff Brotman and Jim Sinegal, and unfortunately, Jeff Brotman recently passed away. I thought the founders of Whole Foods, which is a Texas-based Austin company, before they sold to Amazon, did a wonderful job and recognized again the balance of profit and conscious capitalism. I think Ginny Rometty, who's a woman CEO who I admire a great deal, who runs IBM, has done an extraordinary job as well. And then there's a company, believe it or not, in India that I have just come to admire called Tata, that owns Jaguar and Land Rover, but is an Indian-based company that is our partner in India. And Ratan Tata, to me, is another servant leader who represents such a level of respect and grace for his employees and how he runs his company.
Thanks. And then we have one final question. This is, I think, more on the nuts and bolts of Starbucks. How do you hire, and what do you look for in potential partners?
There are 360,000 Starbucks partners around the world, about 200,000 in the US. This is a simplified answer, but it's really an important answer. We have to hire people who like people. It sounds trite and simple. Not everyone likes people. So we are in the business of serving people. And you got to wake up every day willing to serve. And we've hired about 20,000 veterans over the last few years. One thing about hiring veterans that has been a huge benefit to the company, not only because of their skill base and what they brought to the company, but for other Starbucks people who have not had any understanding of what it means to wear the cloth of the nation. And since so many people were not engaged in the wars, like 99% of the American people had no skin in the game, one of the real benefits has been the understanding and also the pride that people have working alongside veterans. And we've had a great program and something I'm really proud of, and something we continue to do.
Okay, well, I have just one final question. I think we're about out of time. That question, though, would be based on your days up at Northern Michigan. If you choose a vice presidential candidate, will it be Michigan State basketball coach Tom Izzo?
Wow. So I went to school with Tom Izzo, as you know, and Steve Mariucci. Yeah. Michigan State's got a good team this year. They finally may get over the hump and beat Duke. We'll have to see. Okay. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure.
Secretary Baker.